again the 30-minute mark, or sorry, the 60-minute mark when we come back. But you don't have to. Whatever, like we go in and out of the full group. Yeah.
We'll try it, and if it works, great. And if it doesn't, then
that's fine. Yeah.
It'll be for the fun of everyone who may be able to do it, and no one else, I guess. So yeah. Okay, so we're live streaming now, and once Anne gets here, I'll make her co-host.
Are we able to become co-hosts?
I think so. I can definitely try to make one of you. Oh, actually, it says you are a co-host, Kim.
Oh, I am a co-host. Okay. It needs to be. I'm trying to think. Sarah, you're more adept at breakout rooms than I am. When do we want to create them? Can we have them just in the background until we're ready to go?
You can make them now, and then so if you click on the breakout rooms button, there'll be an option, and you can select what your option, what preferences you want now, and then just don't click the button that says invite people to breakout rooms or make breakout rooms or whatever. That button.
Is there any way to make Sarah co-host? I'm just thinking if Sarah could manage the breakout rooms, that might take some of the pressure off Kim, who's going to be doing the overall facilitation.
I can try. Let me see. Oh, there she is. I'm afraid I can't make her a co-host yet. Now I might be able to. Let's see. Okay, I can make, I'll make Sarah a co-host.
That would be wonderful.
Okay.
So I'm in such suspense to see how many people actually.
How many co-hosts can we have? Yeah.
How many people have you been actually averaging at the sessions, Eric? Because we can't tell from the viewers' end.
Oh, yesterday there was, I want to say like probably over 100 for the session I was doing.
Okay.
Right now there's just 13, but it's only 8:36, so people will come in like 1 minute before, and then kind of for the next period after that.
13, what a wonderfully manageable number.
I know. That would reduce our slight panic by grading.
We can have breakout groups.
Everyone can have a breakout room of their own, yeah. And yeah. So yeah, I'll just, when we start, I'll just go over some conference logistics stuff, and then I'll just pass it off to you. It'll take less than a minute, I think.
Sounds perfect. Does anyone have easy access to a slide with our land acknowledgement on it?
I do.
Thank you.
Sarah.
Or just grab the land acknowledgement and I'll put it in.
Yes, I will send it to you outside of Zoom. And then I'm sorry, I had to step away from my computer for a second. I'm to do the breakout rooms.
Thank you.
Also, just to note quickly with the recording button at about the 20-minute mark, I believe it is, or possibly the 30-minute mark, we're going to keep everyone together, but stop to allow them to do an activity on their own, which will be about 5 to 10 minutes of everyone sitting in silence. So you may in fact want to stop the recording there, because after that activity stops, that we immediately go to the breakout rooms.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks. I'll do that.
So you don't get a 10-minute recording of quiet.
Of Zen time, yeah.
Sort of thing they have in Jeopardy. Da, 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 da.
As people come in, we've got a kind of screen for them to look at so they can start doing some of the prep to be in the rooms. Eric, is it okay if I share my screen now just to show that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just need to, once we officially start, I just need to show like the conference slide and all that stuff for like a minute, and you could just have, but yeah, if you want to show it right now, that's fine.
Okay.
Hey, Anne.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Anything we need to discuss before we?
The plan right now is we can start recording when we start, and then about 20 minutes in, there's going to be an activity where we can stop the recording, and then after that, people are going to go to breakout rooms, and then about 30 minutes before the end, we can resume recording. I think is the plan, if that works for you.
Yeah, sounds perfect to me.
Great, thank you.
Great. And as far as Q&A, are we holding questions for the end, or should I look for opportune moments to kind of interject?
Kim, what do you think?
I think probably for the end, although it's there's people who might have questions about the activity, right? So I think if something comes up in the chat that they need us to answer in order to do the activity, by all means interject.
Okay.
At the end, we've left intentionally 10 minutes for discussion, feedback, and Kathleen and Rashmeet are doing a small presentation on something we've done before, and people might have feedback or questions on that. So we tried to allot time.
Okay.
You know how these things go.
Right.
Sounds good. All right, we'll get started in a few minutes then.
Actually, Kim, would it be possible for you to pass me the link that you want people to access there on your?
I was just going to put it in the chat. Are you going to put
That's
it
what I
somewhere
was.
else? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I've been sitting here trying to make the tiny URL copyable without it going immediately to the page. That's what I've been doing for the past 5 minutes.
I see. Yeah, I'm not sure if somebody joins after we have posted something in the chat, will they see that content from earlier?
I don't think so. I think if we put it in now and then put it in again, yeah.
That's what I thought. So I'll take care of that. I'll repost it again as folks are coming in.
There you go. Eric, is Alika in your nearby vicinity?
She's in Mexico, so no.
Oh, I didn't know she was in Mexico. That's awesome.
I know.
When you see her.
She's like on the beach, and I'm just like sitting here with 3 dogs.
Seems unfair, although dogs are lovely.
Yeah, they're fun, but 1 person and 3 dogs is a little outmatched.
Yes, fair enough. Next time you see her, please give her a gigantic squeeze, okay?
For sure.
Now I want to be in Mexico.
I know, it's like, yeah. So I could use the beach right now. All right. And if you want to start the recording, I think we will get started here. All right, let me share my screen. And let me get my slide open. All right, hi everyone. My name is Eric Radio, and I am joined here by Erin Chen today. We are going to be facilitating this session in the LD4 conference on linked data for context. So thank you all for coming. Just a quick administrative stuff. This slide has many important links that I encourage you to check out the conference website, which I'm sure you've all been to. Please do also look at the code of conduct for anything or for more specific details about how this conference is being run. The Twitter account is LD4 Conference, and feel free to also tweet at the hashtag LD4 2021 if you're so inclined. I also really like to encourage you to look at the join the Slack channel. There's a lot of great discussion that happens there, especially as sometimes Q&A can run over time, and this is a great place to continue those discussions. So please do join that that Slack, not really channel, but account, I guess. And then also in that Slack, there's a channel for tech support. So if you're having troubles with something related to the conference, please do message there and we'll attempt to resolve it with you. And then there's a collaborative project at the bottom, so I'd also encourage you to check that out. So this is a really great presentation we have today, so I'm going to turn it over to our presenters now to introduce themselves.
Okay, thanks so much, Eric. Hi, everybody. My name's Kim. I'm going to try and facilitate us through the next 90 minutes of fun. I'm going to share some slides, walk us through what the plan is. There is a link in the chat, and we will keep putting it up as people come in. Thank you, Anne. That'll allow you to take part in our kind of interactive session that'll start probably in about 20 minutes. So you want to go there and follow the instructions as we're chatting and introducing ourselves here. Share my screen. Okay, so first we'd like to start by letting you know that the project links that we, all of us are a part of here, takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded and treaty territories of many Indigenous peoples. It spans Turtle Island and Mother Earth. Honoring and respecting Indigenous peoples and their lands is integral to the work that Links does. We are being administered from the University of Guelph, whose main campus is situated on the ancestral lands of the Wanderon, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, and the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We offer our gratitude to the Indigenous peoples who have inhabited and stewarded these lands for centuries and continue to do so, and acknowledge the importance of the dish with one spoon wampum and our relations with this land and each other. I myself am in London, Ontario right now, and I will put my own land acknowledgement in the chat, and we encourage you to do the same to recognize the different places that we are coming from together today for this session and for the conference. So we have an interactive session here for you today. When we planned this, we estimated there'd be about 30 people here. And then we saw the numbers rise and rise and rise and thought, well, this will be an adventure. So thank you for coming and joining us today. No matter what size our groups get to, I think we're going to be able to make it work the way we've planned out. And special thanks to Aaliyah, Rashmeet, and Kathleen, who jumped in at the very last minute to help us get through the next 90 minutes. We're going to introduce ourselves and then talk to you a little bit about the kind of theory behind what we're doing today, about context, which we've already heard about a little bit in some of the other sessions this week. We're going to demonstrate how the templates that we've asked you to jump into are looking and how they work. And then we're going to give you some time, about 10 minutes, to fill out the beginning of those templates, thinking about your entity that you've chosen before going into breakout rooms. And these breakout rooms are going to be where the magic happens. And we're going to talk about, you have 2 questions to answer based on your entity, where you'll be thinking and drawing and designing and sketching, whatever you feel like doing on these questions about context and interfaces. And before we come back to the large group to highlight and then tell you about a recent design frolic that we ran on a similar theme and how that went went and kind of compare what we come up with today to what we came up with there. And then we have some time for Q&A at the end. But do feel free to ask questions throughout the session, and especially if they're about how this works, so we can answer them for everyone before going into our groups. So Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you to start the conversation on who you are and what context means to you.
Sure. I'm Susan Brown. I'm a faculty member at the University of Guelph in the School of English and Theatre Studies, and I hold a Canada Research Chair in Collaborative Digital Scholarship. And I'm the director of the Links Project, which Kim is going to talk about more in a bit. I'm a Victorianist by training, a feminist literary historian. And so for me, that context in terms of making connections, trying to trace out processes, how influences work, why things happen, why things change, what the relationship is between everything has always been really central to my work. I kind of came of age in the middle of like the theory fights, the feminist sex wars, new historicism, and I continue to be really interested in how social processes and literary production and reception all sort of feed each other reciprocally, and really interested in the sort of theories that try to make sense of that, but also how in practice can we make these sorts of relationships more accessible to people when there's so much information. Like, we think of ourselves being in the middle of an information deluge, but the Victorians were too. Like, they wrote a ton. I don't know how they wrote as much as they did without computers. So trying to make sense of that context to inform my own work was always a challenge. And I think this is one of the things that really appealed to me about the idea of engaging in literary history, using computers, which were, compared to what we have now, really rudimentary. In the early 90s, when I sort of came of age as a professor, the World Wide Web was just getting going. So a lot of what we have now just was in its infancy. But I got involved in this project that became the Orlando Project, which is a history of women's writing in the British Isles. It's big in terms of born digital scholarship. It's the equivalent of about 80 print volumes or more at this point. A combination of biocritical profiles of women writers and events, but having to do with social and intellectual and cultural and political context and bibliography. And I think one of the things that was most exciting for me as we built Orlando was the way that links could be used to contextualize, because on the web then links were always like one-to-one. You had to decide what to link to, and there was all this sort of hype about how hypertext was going to get us away from linearity and so on, but hypertexts were linear. They took you in a chain. Whereas what we did in the Orlando interface was have links that were not just linear. A link would take you to a whole set of relationships that person had, or that place, or that organization, and allow you, because we were using XML semantic tagging, allow you to choose where you went and give you already a sense of context, because the semantic tagging meant that we could categorize those links and say, here are all the intertextual relationships that a writer has. Here are all the friend relationships that they have. Here are things associated with their social identity. And so I think that was, what was most exciting for me as we built the Orlando interface, was that sense that the digital could make us able to think about and strategize and contextualize things differently. But I always wanted a larger context, because there were all these other projects in women's writing, and we could link to them manually, but there was no sort of systematic way of making those connections. And I think that's why linked open data was so attractive as I started to understand what its potential was. And so, I'm really excited to be here and to be engaging with you all today.
Great, I'll go next. I'm Erin Canning. I'm the ontology systems analyst at Links. So that means that I am looking at the linked data standards and schemas that we can use to represent data. And I spent a lot of time thinking about semantically what it means to move data from one format or one structure into another. I come from art history and from museums. So that's my background for joining the Links project. And as a result, I was very interested in the context of museum data. So as these institutions have histories, not only with collecting practices. They also have histories of cataloging practices. What data was originally collected and why and by who, and then how that transferred and grew as museums and other institutions changed from, card catalogs to online databases, and how some of those things either, get replicated or new initiatives come up. But then what are the contexts of those initiatives? What data gets introduced by them? What data doesn't get touched when those things are brought in? And all of these kinds of questions around museum data and context really got, I guess, under my skin and into my head. I then got introduced to linked data as part of my grad school experience. And it seemed to me like a really interesting approach to starting to answer some of these questions, or a new way to look at some of the questions that were being asked. And so that's just a little bit about where I'm coming from in terms of linked data and context today, both in my work at Links and in this session in particular. Thank you.
I guess I'll go next. My name is Rashmi Kaur, and I'm one of the student research assistants this summer with Links. And I'm working on the SCALE grant, which stands for Serendipity, Context, and Agency in Linked Environments. So some of my work this summer has been examining existing knowledge boxes and panels and trying to create something similar for Links. And you'll learn a lot about what Links is later on. But what I'm interested in mostly is trying to understand from a humanities scholar perspective, what kinds of relationships and interesting facts are relevant to these researchers and what to highlight in these kinds of context boxes. And I'm particularly interested in how context can lead to serendipitous encounters and how user agency and experience affects these interactions. And I guess I'll pass it on to Kathleen.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kathleen McCulloch. I am also a student research assistant with Scale and Links. And a lot of my work this summer, and also my interest, is just around user experience and user interface design, especially for interfaces for accessing and exploring linked open data. And so context for me is always this like Goldilocks style problem, where how do you give just enough information to a user where they can navigate through a system easily and effectively without giving them too much where they're overwhelmed, or not enough where they actually can't. And how do we best represent that information? And so not just for researchers, but for users as a whole.
My name is Aliyah Mo. I'm a data interface developer. And so my background is quite different. It's in software engineering. So context to me means a lot of different things, usually in terms of resource management and scoping. So only a few years ago, I got involved in the conversion work for Links and Quark in converting Orlando data into linked data. So it's been quite a journey in kind of learning what context means to fellow researchers about how they want to provide provenance about the assertions made in their data, and how we can really get to the snippets that allowed us to derive those triples.
Hi, I'm Sarah Roger. I'm the Links project manager. In my capacity as a project manager, one of the things I'm really interested about in context is how we make sure that we provide enough context for pieces of information without providing context that goes beyond the bounds of what information we want to have shared. So what falls within and outside of copyright, what falls within and outside of Indigenous knowledge protection, and so on, and how we draw the lines around the information to make sure that we're showing what we can in the right possible ways that does justice to all of the people who both want to have access to the information and also want to somehow restrict access to the information for whatever valid reason.
Wonderful. So context clearly has a lot of context. See what I did there? I'm not going to introduce my own because the slides talk to what I do. Rashmeet introduced the project or named the project and talked a little bit about what her, Kathleen, and I are working on in terms of scale. I will say that my background is trained in history, did a beginning of a PhD in in Renaissance studies, where I had all these ideas about being in history for the rest of my life. Change of life, came back to library and information science, and now do all things digital. Sometimes, occasionally touch a book, but for the most part, this is not where I expected to end up. But it's given me a really interesting background for thinking through things like context in digital environments. So links, which thank you, Tim, for putting the right link in there, is a CFI funded cyber infrastructure grant to create the conditions for a massive triple store, a series of interfaces for converting linked data, for interacting with linked data. And it is about culture in Canada, primarily. There are some projects that extend beyond those borders, but that is where we're starting. We have 40 plus research projects that are giving in some way, shape, or form their data to us to go through a pipeline where we create linked data from this. And to think through how all of this works for humanities researchers, right? We know there's linked data out there for very many people. We know a lot of it is driven by the economy. And we want to see what we can do by putting cultural heritage information, created by researchers for researchers out onto the semantic web. The scale grant runs alongside links. Right now, it's a smaller insight development grant to test usability for some of these tools, particularly looking at the things mentioned in the title, serendipity, context, and agency. We started by looking at an extant tool called HuViz, which is a visualization tool for kind of network visualizations of linked data. And now we're really beginning to think about context. So we want to think about what tools and interfaces do this well. We've seen some of these already this week. And then in particular, what makes these contextual needs of humanities researchers different than other people, maybe even just for their own uses on the web. And then what type of these contexts can inspire those aha moments, the ones that yesterday Huda noted that we don't have anymore because we don't have the shelves to skim, right? This is a very common theme when you interview or talk to researchers, is they miss that. And so do we think that linked data environments can work to bring some of that back? I'll just go quickly through some of the things that are already out there. We know, everyone, I would imagine, knows the Google Knowledge Panel. You search something, it gives you information about it. It's linked. It changes all the time. Every time you go and search for something, the Knowledge Panel is doing something different, but it's providing you contextual information drawn from a series of different places, including Wikipedia. The Wikipedia info panel is when you create a Wikipedia page, just kind of filled in information that gives you the core, entities in regards to the thing you're searching on. So we have an Anne of Green Gables theme here until I show you an interface where I couldn't interact with Anne of Green Gables information, but this is where we'll go. So these two are giving us immediate pieces of information about the thing we're searching on. The SNAC interface, social networks and archival contexts, does this kind of thing a little bit differently. It's got a series of panels, as you see along the top, so you can look at different pieces of information. You can also look at relationships between Lucy Maud Montgomery and where she has collections, where she's associated with collections, etc. And it's got a graph that shows you these connections. So different kinds of visualizations for talking about these contextual relationships. WorldCat also does this. This is Lucy Maud Montgomery's WorldCat page. You can see some of the covers of her books, so you're getting something visual right away. Her timeline of publications along the middle there, and then answers maybe a little more deeper questions about her work, like what is most widely held in WorldCat libraries, and kind of the genres and things she fits into. So obviously for a library-centric audience, this one. But you can see with the timeline, we're getting a different kind of context immediately up in our faces. I believe that Laura presented last year at LD4. I could be wrong, but I think she presented on Big Diva last year. And this is a completely different kind of context, right? Where I've put Green Gables in because Lucy Maud Montgomery would not come up the way I wanted it to. So that's a fun search find. And this shows you through a network, everything, every collection that has something where Green Gables is tagged in it in a library. I'm logged into my Guelph library using this. So everything in blue I have access to. If you're not logged into a library, it shows, like, kind of blocks those out in a gray. So it shows you not only where these things are available and allows you to dig down by using that panel on the right-hand side, but also shows you what you have access to. One day we won't need that, right? One day the world will be open and we will just have a happy green or a blue screen here. What Links is using as one of our main interfaces is Research Space. It's out of the British Library, and it provides a whole series of ways of thinking through context for linked data. I'm going to show you 3 of them quickly, just to think about things that we'll be doing with our own entities. And I have to let you know that our data is just getting into Research Space right now. So next year, we're going to be able to come and show you how we're using this, hopefully quite intimately, and with researchers that are, using this along the lines of doing their own research. For now, I'm going to show you quickly what the resource details look like. So this is from a project called Late Hokusai. And this is just details on a single painting as an object, and you can scroll and scroll and scroll and find more information about this. And Research Space uses SciDoc CRM, so the fields at the bottom might seem familiar to you if that is something that you use at your institution or on your projects. They also have something called a knowledge map that allows you to click on one of these entities and then create the knowledge map that you're interested in. So when you click on one of them, it'll give you a list of these different predicates, and then you can select from them to grow this map out one at a time. So I did this in about 3 minutes, just trying to think through what the type of this entity, the painting was. And you can grow this out so you can see the class of the entity as well. You could also do this in a different way and look at the artist and then the artist's relationship to the museum that it's held in, et cetera, et cetera. So this is context that's really user-based, right? That allows you to make your own little knowledge map about the entity up based on what you're interested in. And finally, see if this works. I think this is that did not work at all. Give me just a second. There we go. This is the most interesting one, I think, as far as humanities researchers are concerned, is their semantic narrative that allows you to write an essay, but embed the different images from Research Space directly into your argument, right? So you can get a set of entities that you can include in here and then contextualize them with your own writing and put the knowledge map that you are kind of drawing your argument from directly into your essay. So 3 different ways of context in terms of these different entities, all different from the context box, and yet for the most part, especially for links, largely untested, right? We think this is what is going to work, but we have no idea until we get our hands on this if this is going to work for our own users. Right. So from that, I hope you can see that context can be about a person, a place, an event, an object, etc. It can also be about a collection. It doesn't have to be about a single thing. For today, we're going to talk about these entities. There's also this element of taking researchers back to the source information, right? Not just saying, okay, there's a link here and a link here and a link here, but allowing them to go back and find where those links are in these texts. This is what Aaliyah was talking about in the beginning, right? Being able to say, oh, this piece of information is from Orlando. Let's go over there and find out more information about it. Showing connections between entities really helps us draw out those the context, and working across collections. So we no longer have to go to one place and figure that's what we're that's where our information is coming from, that we can draw on anyone that's using similar semantic technologies. All right. So with that said, what we're going to do is walk you through what the slides that we're hoping, or sorry, the page that we're hoping you fill out looks like. So you should by now have made a copy of the Google Doc that looks something like this, although your page will not say Anne of Green Gables across the top. It will say whichever entity you have chosen. And while I'm doing this, Sarah is going to go and fill this out so you can see kind of the extent that we're hoping that you will be able to give us information here. I should say, just before I start this, that yesterday, Rob Sanders said something in his talk about usability where he said it's dependent on the audience. And I actually think that context and getting something out of the context, and especially that serendipity moment, is dependent on the audience just as much, down to, I would say, the individual. And that's where we're going by asking you these questions, is really thinking through how you bring something to your questions, and how you can't have an aha moment. Like a computer can't give you an aha moment, right? But the semantic technologies could be worked in such a way that we try to aim at providing information to people based on some information about themselves. So we are not asking you here to fill in information that's private. You don't have to share anything you don't want to. You can make up a persona, okay? So we'll walk through it here. And we're going to have about 10 minutes as soon as we've shown you this for you to dig in and do this yourself if you haven't already started. So the first thing you're going to do is just fill in these blanks. Who are you, or who is your persona? Where do you work? Or if you're in school, where do you go to school? And a little bit about your background and what you're interested in. And thinking about these things, you should answer them as you are, as your kind of like researcher, with your researcher hat on, your kind of work life hat on. And then what perspectives do you bring to your research? So when you're searching on the web, for example, or when you're searching in a library or a gallery, a museum, what are you thinking about? And not all of the time, obviously, it's not going to answer, not going to work for every single answer. And then what are your priorities when you're researching a thing or a person or an object, right? What do you want to know about them? So you can see Sarah's just answering a quick line or two here, right? You may want to put a whole bunch more, and you can do that later by all means, but all we're looking for here is a line or two thinking this through. And then you've selected an entity based on your interest. So what do you want to know about it? And what we're looking for here is just a few things, or sorry, what kinds of things do you already know about it? So things off the top of your head without looking on the web. And if the answer is nothing, that's fine. Just write, I have no idea. Yeah, a few things that Sarah's jotted down is who it's written by, that the book is a Canadian classic. Red hairs and freckles have been my lifelong sorrow. Sarah, I don't know if that's if that's your dream.
I get to that in the next point. That is what she says in the musical, at least a lot. She goes, red hair and freckles have been my lifelong sorrow. And that's what I think of when I think of Anne of Green Gables.
That's awesome. So it's a direct quote.
Yeah.
Yes, awesome. Okay, so then we show you the Wikidata page, right? And you can, I would spend a minute or two just glancing through it. Many of you are familiar with Wikidata. And then try to think through what's not there that you want to know, right? Or what are they showing you in a way that it's not useful to you, right? And so these are the questions that we get at that might combine data, right? Are all the covers so serious looking? There you go, Sarah. There's a quest to be able to answer with linked data. But one of the things the Wikidata page brings up is the cover. Right. Yeah. Sort of that context box, and it is so depressing and does not suggest that this is a fun book about a child with a vivid imagination. So I thought it was a great question from the information we were provided. Yeah, and the slide that I had up before from WorldCat showed 3 of them. They're the exact ones I had as a child, right? That is Anne of Green Gables in my head. Those are the ones I had too. Yeah. So then finally, we're going to ask you to get rid of Wikidata in your head and just think everything is open and everything is endless. You have all the information at the end of your fingertips and it's linked. What might you want to ask or learn about the entity? And here, just a couple questions, just like things that you don't have to worry about where you're going to get this information from. Just get these things down. Sarah's got some great questions here. what do people on Prince Edward Island think of being so firmly associated with a novel? I thought was a great one, right? What an amazing question to be able to answer. I don't know if anyone here is from PEI. Shout out if you are. So that's what we're going to ask you to do in the next 10 minutes. Fill out as much as you can. If you finish before the 10-minute mark, just take a break. We're going to be here. So if you have specific questions, you can chuck them in the chat, or if you feel like speaking up, by all means do. I think we're going to turn off the recording at this point, if that's okay, just so if people do have questions they want to ask and they just want to take their time to answer. So we'll go until 11:25. Letting you answer your questions. And if anyone has had any trouble getting into the documents or anything, you can message us in the chat privately, any one of us, and we'll help you sort it out. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for right now, folks. Oh yeah, someone else needs to explore Mama.
Has anybody not been able to make a document? If so, if you want to indicate in the chat, we can help you out.
Kim, it looks like there's a question in the chat for you, a specific question from Ed about troubleshooting how to set the folder to LD4 participation.
Right. So with the first step, Ed, were you okay? Erin's Erin's answering it, and you have to be
Sorry, I was
logged
already
into
typing.
Google. That was something I didn't say. You do need to be logged into Google to be able to do this. If you can't get it into the folder, Ed, it's not the end of the world. You can send it to us later if you wish, or you can just continue to do it on your own. Should say too, if it seems like you are all alone, like Arden, don't worry, because we're going to join you in your groups. and a conversation of 2 or 3 will go a very long way for plotting out what we have planned.
And a lot of people haven't signed up for entities yet. I feel like people are holding back, but you've got to commit at some point, folks. Can't do everything. Can't do everything.
Ruth. It wasn't until Erin had sent me the O'Keeffe Museum's page that I was like, really? Is that how that's spelled? Yes. And now I get it right every time. Okay, while you're spending the last couple minutes there filling out your documents, and again, even a line per answer is useful, just let you know a couple of things. So we're hoping as a result of all of this to create a kind of like short report on what we found, and I'll make sure that's available to everyone who's participated. And the second half of this, we're going to break you into groups. If the groups end up being very tiny, we'll combine them. But we're going to see how it goes to focus on our individual entities. And we're going to spend some time thinking through the questions that we have at the second page of your documents, which is to think about one of these questions that you're likely just getting to, these big thinking questions, and to try and think about what these interfaces might look like. And this doesn't mean you have to design a whole web page, just, you know, what buttons might you click on? What might you expect to see? How might this information come to you? And we've provided a series of different tools that you can use to do this if you want to work together. You can also do this on a pen and paper. It doesn't have to be necessarily something you do on your computer screen. And what we're asking you to do, if you do end up doing it on a piece of paper, to take a quick picture with your phone and drop it in your Google Doc at the end of this, if you're comfortable doing so. And the second question, once you've got an idea of what you think this might look like, or how you envision a kind of useful contextual interface, is where does this information come from, right? And you can note that down just by sketching it out, or just to kind of think through those things with your group. And if you think it's useful to know where that information has come from, how would the interface tell you such a thing, right? We can share our screens when we're in the different groups, or you can jump in and share your screen, any one of you, along the lines of what you're thinking. Okay, so I think if everyone is good to go, Sarah, I'll have you move us into our, or move everyone into their breakout rooms. Or sorry, not move everyone. You can choose a breakout room.
So I've invited everyone to join a breakout room. You can pick from the list to match up with the choice that you made for the first part of the activity and head over there. If you are still undecided or haven't filled out a sheet, feel free to pick a topic now. And if you're having any problems, just hang around here and we'll help you out once everyone else has scattered to the winds. And we're going to be in the breakout rooms for about half an hour, I believe Kim said, and you'll get an announcement calling you back. One of us will be there to join you and move you along. If anybody is having a hard time joining a breakout room, feel free to turn on your mic and let us know, or send a message in the chat. I see people scattering. This is a good sign. If you're here to listen and you can't participate, feel free to go and listen in a room, even if you can't participate. There should be a chat function once you get to the breakout room where you can say that you don't have the capacity to turn off your mic and join in. But the main room here will be empty for the next half hour. And if for whatever reason it's not possible for you to join a breakout room at all, feel free to return here at about 5 minutes to noon, because in the meantime, there will be nothing to see.
5 minutes to the hour, depending on where you are.
Oh,
I realized how spread everyone is when Eric said it was 8:45. I was like, what?
Can't find the list of breakout rooms. Somebody says, okay, if you can't find the list of breakout rooms and you want to let me know in the chat, I can move you there on my own.
Yeah, for me, it's showing up under the ellipsis that says more, if you can't find it.
Good one.
Moderator skills, just.
And I suppose people from the links group should feel free to start heading off.
Yeah, and I made you all co-hosts. If you, for some reason, don't have the ability to talk in the breakout rooms, I think you can select people individually and allow them to talk if that feature is not working. So hopefully that works.
I think we should probably start scattering too.
Yep, everyone should go into their rooms.
Kim, which of the two that remain do you want?
I'll go to Kel's if you want.
Okay, yeah.
Did you see Ed's question? Can you put him into breakout room G?
Breakout room G for Ed. Super. Yeah, I'm going to do that right now. Ed. Assign to group G. Okay, moderators or LD4 moderators, Eric and Ann, can you guys see the breakout room tab too and control it?
Yep.
I couldn't see them.
Sure
Yep.
can.
Okay, super. So if anybody else has a problem
Sure.
and needs assigning to a room or anything, will you guys take care of that?
Yeah, we'll be here to shuffle people around as needed.
Excellent. Thanks. And feel free to come around and join us. If everything seems under control here, pick a room and come join in, even if you didn't fill out the thing.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, and I'm off to room G.
Eric, if you can hold down the fort, would you mind terribly if I shuffle off to one of the rooms? I'd like to follow along.
Yeah, I'll wait here and fix something if something comes up.
Okay, and just direct message me or send me an email or something if
Something goes bad. Yeah. Okay.
exactly.
All
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
7 terabytes of information. So another thing, Steve, is they're going to be able to go up to one of the computers. It'll be like a little kiosk.
Kim, should I go ahead and restart the recording at this point?
Yeah, you can by all means. Yeah. Okay, a couple things, just backing up because I completely forgot something at the beginning. We have a Padlet. Sarah, can I ask you to drop the link in the chat? And based on what you've been talking about in your groups or what you were introduced to at the beginning, we just have a couple questions there. Padlet is anonymous, so you can fill out and put whatever you like in these columns. But it's to think about things like the interfaces that you use that you like, the features of those interfaces that you think work well in terms of identifying context. And then there's a few other more specific ones around different types of context. And I will also roll that into kind of the like little mini report we pull out of this as lists of things that people find useful and why. So please feel free to fill that in as we're going through our last half hour here, or later on if you wish. So what we're going to do now is go around to each of the links folks and just do a quick minute or two of what you found working in your groups. Besides the fact that half an hour goes way too fast. That's the one thing I found. Perhaps we can go in the order that we introduced ourselves. Susan, if you're okay to kick things off.
Okay. Yep. Just unmuting myself. Right. So we had the O'Keeffe Museum. And we had a lot of, we were all sort of data oriented. So we were all like talking about, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, but not so much about the interface, but we did start to get down. So one of the things that came out of our discussion, well, we talked about a ton of things, but one of the things that I thought was quite important was the notion that you just don't want data, you want narratives, you just don't want links, you want something that sort of brings things together in relationship in some way. So we didn't have any specific suggestions about how to do that exactly, but I thought it was a really important point. And then the O'Keeffe, there's a lot of linked data on O'Keeffe already, and there's a lot of information on O'Keeffe generally. So there was no shortage of information. So the question became like, how do you give people a really compact view that allows them to move out into the wealth of information that is there? So we talked about from the very get-go, we talked about like, what are we talking about when we talk about the O'Keeffe Museum? The physical location seems to be spread across multiple locations because it includes your houses. Are we talking about the building itself? Are we talking about the collection? Are we talking about the organization? All of those could point people out into more detailed information about those aspects of the O'Keeffe Museum, which is kind of like I guess a multi-entity object. Or multi-entity type, or the suggestion was we might start also with personas, like visiting information. You only want information about like hours and fees and stuff like that if you actually want to visit. If you're a researcher, maybe you don't care about that at all. So you might have different motivations for following particular paths from an initial view. Is that enough, or do you want more?
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. I forget our order. Erin, I think you were next.
Yeah, I'll be next. I was in the group that was talking about Emily Carr, and it was a really wonderful discussion. And we had a Google Jamboard going to draw out some of the ideas, and that seemed really, it was a really wonderful way to sort of talk about the kinds of things that we were talking about all together. Some things that we found was the kinds of questions that were being asked fell into a few high-level categories of things like social networks or timelines or geography. And therefore, are these other ways that we can think about categorizing like groupings of information? So when someone's coming to search along particular lines in the same way that maybe, you can search for, you're looking for articles or you're looking for books, and that sort of categorization, can we apply that same sort of thinking to other kinds of information, search and discovery? I really liked what Susan was just talking about with personas, because I think that also speaks to some of the things that we were discussing, although we didn't use that word for them. But that could be an interesting approach to a solution to say, not everyone is into exploratory search. When someone is looking for a resource, how can we make sure that we're facilitating a search process that speaks to that, as well as, or in addition to, or while not sidelining people who do want that exploratory experience. and managing those different kinds of user requirements.
Great. Rashmi?
Yeah, so our group had the Scream, and we started a Google Jamboard with kind of some of the questions that the group had, and then that kind of translated into more questions stemming off of the original documents that each individual person began. So we kind of all had this image of the Scream in our head, but then upon seeing it again, we were like, oh, this is different from what we imagined. And we were like, why is that? So kind of trying to figure out our individual sort of biases when approaching things and the way context works in that manner. And then also there's a lot of questions about like time periods because the painting has existed for a long time, and understanding sort of how it was received when it was originally painted versus how it has influenced other painters in the now times is interesting. And then at one point in the Wikidata references, there was a mention of the painting being stolen. And a lot of the people in the group kind of caught on to that piece and were like, ooh, this is interesting. I want to know more. So kind of trying to figure out how to bring that forward in terms of context and sparking those kinds of like serendipitous aha moments. So we talked a little bit about that, and we were just getting started talking about what would sort of appear in like a ideal context box. And our group came up with sort of the idea of like timelines, because again, we talked a lot about how this painting has sort of existed for a long time. And I thought it was interesting because we came up with like 3 different kinds of timelines. So one was like showing like the physical painting itself and where it has existed throughout time. The second one was sort of like not the physical painting, but the ideas around the painting and how those have changed over time. And then the third one was mapping out the publications and articles that have existed based off of this painting throughout time. So it can get very messy very quickly, is what we found. And then, yeah, and then, since this is sort of like kind of turned into like a pop cultural kind of reference, seeing images of how this has like the original painting has been mapped onto different kinds of imagery in recent times, and kind of exploring context in that manner would be interesting. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm definitely seeing similarities between the groups considering we chose different objects. It's pretty awesome. Kathleen?
Yeah, I actually had jumped into the group with Aaliyah, and we were talking about Toni Morrison. And some of the things that came up were like things we talked a little bit about, what do we want to see, and then a little bit about how we would want to see them represented. So I think there was a comment about, how do you show the works in the order with the most important one? But of course, that's a very subjective question. And how to display events and things like that. Would you want an interactive timeline? Do you just want them listed? That kind of thing. There's a couple others. Leah, I don't know if you wanted to talk about
Another
those.
point was about our sources and how we would almost want to filter out sources that we don't think are trustworthy. So really getting down to the context of where these assertions are coming from. And yeah, and I think there was a lot of discussion about kind of a lot of these things are subjective about what is important. Do I want to see the list of works in order, or which ones were more influential, which ones might be related more to the research I'm doing? And we also did a Jamboard as well.
Yeah, I think we could have just put Jamboard on the list of, of options, but that's okay. Options are always good. Sarah?
So we didn't make a Jamboard. We made a Google Slide, which is effectively making a Jamboard, but still. I was in the group that was discussing Rouen Cathedral, and a lot of the things we talked about have already been covered off by the rest of you, but just to go over them. The first one was we talked about personas also. So who was looking at the information? Why were they looking at the information? Were they a researcher? Were they a tourist? Were they local? Were they far away? And how much that was going to shape what it was that the person wanted to see. We talked about the cathedral as being both a whole item in and of itself and being an item that's made up of many smaller parts. So unlike something like the screen, which is like just the painting, although I guess even then there's many copies of the painting. We talk about the cathedral. Are you talking about the building? Are you talking about the artworks contained within the building? Are you talking about the organ? Did you want to know about where these things were located within the building, what the context of each of them was with respect to the building? So like what it's sort of accordioned in and out. We had that same accordion sense with respect to both the place and the time. So we wanted to know, we thought, well, when is it built? And then the question was, well, when exactly do you even say that a cathedral was built? The day you came up with the idea, the day you put the first stone down, the day you put the last stone down, the day it was designated as like an official something or other? We really could not come to grips with a time for it. And oddly, we also couldn't quite come to grips with where it was as a place, because the question was, is it where it is now within the district in France, or is it like, what was that district called when it was built? Was it always called the same thing in between the two times? What difference does it make? What if you search for one of these terms or not the other term? And if you could have a timeline and a map, could these two things somehow connect to each other in a way that you could know what the place was at the time and what the time was at the place? And then even more complicated than that, we thought, well, what is the place exactly? What are you asking? Are you asking like, what street is it on? Where is it physically located? Are you asking where is it relative to other cathedrals, which is something you might want to know as a researcher, but you also as a researcher might want to know, is it on a pilgrimage route? Why did they put a cathedral there in the first place? But the flip side of it is if you were going, you would want to know what the nearest subway stop was. So like, how do you sort of square all those details? Which then sort of circles back around to the persona, which is who are you and why are you looking? Something that came up as a result of that was this idea that like one person's dull is another person's delight. So the Wikidata page tells you about the organ, and we started talking about, wouldn't it be neat if maybe it showed you some details about the organ or people who played on the organ or interesting facts about the organ, and that would be great context for some people, and other people would just be like, snooze city, forget it, and move on. So how do you like make that context something that's engaging for some people without risking alienating other people? And we did talk about the idea of having a button that just clicked up like fun facts one after the other, so you could just keep clicking until you got something that tickled your fancy. By the time we had talked about all of that, somebody in our group said, didn't we just rewrite the Wikipedia page? This is a lot of information, which brought us around to the idea that maybe what we wanted was something that was going to be non-narrative. So we either needed things like timelines and maps, or we needed point form notes, or we needed drop downs that you could click on. So you could just pick something and be taken to additional information about the specific thing you wanted, because we could never fit all this on one screen or even 10 screens.
Awesome. Yes. I think the dream you were alluding to is making the I'm feeling lucky button actually work, because it only works if you like literally put in the restaurant that you want to go to, and then it takes you there. But to get you an aha moment, I'm feeling lucky does pretty much nothing. So yeah, fixing and repairing that, I think with LOD and these ideas of personas would be pretty interesting. My group was looked at the Book of Kells. I would say that we came up with not any interface, but a million other questions. So we tried to derive those questions into some kind of order through our conversation. We talked a lot about provenance and how we might want to show that, and timelines and maps again came up. We talked about these layers and the need to layer things over time, and went down as far as, can we show the layers of the actual Book of Kells being built, right? Is that something we could do with very expensive technology? But thinking through using IIIF to tell a story about the creation of an art piece. One of the things that we talked quite a bit about was like critical discussions of the Book of Kells and scholarship, and how if we were able to put those on timeline, whether it's a different timeline that's showing provenance or similar, you might be able to kind of account for some of the uncertainty that arises, right? When scholarship it has a debate about something, when something was built, created, when there was a religious persecution in the area that might have impacted this object's meaning. Could we show that on a timeline and then let people go to a place where the different pieces of scholarship that say that are, as opposed to necessarily only books specifically about the art piece or the art piece itself? We found a timeline on the visitors site at Trinity. It's real bad. There's like 4 things on it. It's great for people who want to visit Trinity, but there's an 800-year gap, as the historians amongst us immediately were like, that's a lot of time to not account for in a timeline. And one thing that we did that it sounds like everyone else did was spoke from their own experience, right? So we started with, I'm an archaeologist, I'm a historian, quite naturally, which again is getting at those personas that influences the questions that we asked. And finally, we started to think about influence. If you know the Book of Kells, you might know the movie more than the actual object now. Certainly my son does. And then facsimiles, exhibitions, how do we show all these things? And again, we defaulted to a map to think through those things, but a map with either layers or pop-ups so we can tell more information about it. So lots of good thinking about ways to contextualize all of these. We've got about 17 minutes left. And what we wanted to do is just briefly show you what we did in something that we are calling a design frolic with a group of all of our research students this summer, based on the idea of context as well. I'm gonna let Kathleen, are you sharing your screen? Yeah, okay. I'm gonna let Kathleen share her screen, and Kathleen and Rashmeet are gonna walk you through what this is, and then you'll get an idea for what it's like to do this over a little bit more of an extended period of time than 90 minutes.
Yeah, so is that working? Like everyone can see the right thing?
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll be talking to you a little bit about something we came up with this summer, which we're calling a design frolic, as Kim said. So next slide. Basically, what we did was hold a design frolic around the idea of context and trying to understand how we can build that into an interface for links, specifically focusing on humanities and sort of developing those relationships in a meaningful way, so that researchers, when they come to links, could explore those entities and jump between various relationships. Yeah, so we came up with this idea of the design frolic in part due to the Amish tradition of a frolic, which traditionally brings together communities' food and goals to work towards. So we kind of developed that into a design frolic to try and solve design-related problems with an emphasis on directed play within our summer student community. And unfortunately, this had to happen online versus in person. We hope to run some of these in person as soon as possible. And we hope to just sort of connect various people in the DH and LOD communities through playful prompts. And hopefully this kind of brings together some different minds and different interdisciplinary backgrounds to collaborate on thinking through some of these design-related problems, which are often an interdisciplinary matter.
Yeah, so our the design frolic that we held about the context box specifically was quite a bit smaller than this. And so we had 4 groups of 3 participants, and we gave them an entity. We didn't let them choose, unlike today. And the information that we gave them wasn't the Wikidata page. We actually had taken the Wikipedia pages, so a whole lot more information and a lot more details, and gave them those that we had modified a little bit to sort of take out categories so as to remove the bias. But we did cover, places, things, people as well. So it was very similar. And then the first session, or the first half of that session, we focused on information mapping. So where today you were asked to fill out the template and answer some of those questions, we actually gave them this prompt. So if you were researching for a paper and you came across the entity that your group was given, what information would you want to see? And so we asked them to do this in a very visual information map way. And they set their own discovery questions. This was the only prompt we gave them. We didn't have a template like today. So this is an example of what one group chose to do for ZD Smith. And so you can see they divided it into categories and different pieces of, categories of information. And so I don't think it's really easy to read for you, but if you could read it, you would be able to see that, they have the section publications, and then it goes into novels, plays, short fiction. And then as it branches out, it gets more granular and less relevant. And so you can it goes from novels to their publisher and book sales and bestsellers. So those kinds of connections as you branch out. And on the other side here, about Zadie Smith's life, she likes to tap dance. And then could you make a connection with other people who like to tap dance? Maybe. And so as you branch out, making those connections, but also finding that the information gets further and further away from the entity. And then this is another example of one of the information maps that a group made. And so you can see that they started with really different categories, or not even categories. They started with really different questions. And so approaching this from a who, what, when, where, why, and how, as well as what are stories that we can tell about this entity, and thinking about the information that they'd like to see in terms of that, rather than how can we divide up the different aspects of this person's life, or the information about this entity. And again, they used a legend to, okay, now that we've gathered all of this information, how can we decide what we'd want to see most, and what's most relevant, and what's most interesting, and what's kind of boring, and what isn't actually something that we'd want to look at. And then you can look at the connections here a little bit. I don't think it's very readable on your screens, but connecting so this is the Cloud Gate, so it's the bean in Chicago. And so connecting that sculpture to who created it and people who were involved with it, and then connecting those people to the people that they're connected with, or the entities that they're connected with. And so again, branching out and making connections and finding more granular information as you go on.
Yeah, and so then for the second half of our design frolic, we gave each group some time to design, and they used Figma, which you might be familiar with, to design in small groups, using that information that they came up with in that first half to sort of put an interface behind what they were thinking. So on the next slide is the prompt. If a pop-up window containing more information about the entity appeared, what would you want it to look like? And then use the information maps that you created to construct these. And so we're just gonna go over each group and sort of highlight some of the major things that they came up with. So the first group you'll see here, their entity was the Louvre, and they had an image gallery right up in the right-hand corner nice and big. And that was just to show some of like the paintings that are there, the actual location, which was also highlighted in a map that would take you to directions to the Louvre. And then they also chose to have a popular visiting times graph, sort of similar to how if you search a place on Google, it comes up with like that graph showing like there's like a lot of people right now at this place. Maybe you want to come back later type of thing. And then they also created a timeline, which was a popular thing today as well, just highlighting important events at the museum. And then this group also at the top decided to have categories and break that down into different tabs, just so it's easier for the user to sort of break the information up into multiple digestible sort of pages. And then for the second group, they had CloudGate, which is the bean in Chicago. They chose to have sort of a brief description of the sculpture and sort of who created it, along with a map similar to the last group. However, this group, instead of showing sort of like that typical timeline, they wanted to highlight important dates with the options. All of these sort of have options to expand into like more information within this page or box. And then something interesting and unique to this group was that they decided to have a settings icon, which would open up that little pop-up on the right-hand side. And basically this would allow the user to filter through the sources of where this information is coming from. And also something interesting was they wanted to build in sort of like a spider web type of connecting like path history, so that if you searched an entity and wanted to jump somewhere else, you could have a history of where you went and visualize that in some sort of path network, which was interesting. And then this group also chose to have their information relayed in sort of divided into sort of broad categories. And you'll see here they had the stories category highlighted. So that I think is kind of similar to the persona idea that was coming up a lot today, with just that this sculpture has interesting things and sort of a life behind itself.
Yeah, and then this was the third group, and they really thought outside of the context box, because this was this, I think they called it a flower petal, or a flower with petals. And so each petal on the flower was a category. So again, we're seeing that sectioning of information so as to better sort of deliver it to users and to researchers in a way that, you know, when you hover over it, it pops up and it says, oh, this is going to be Maya Angelou's writing. And so if I'm interested in that, I can go right to there. And they really had an emphasis on the visual aspect, not just in how they presented the information, but also including a picture of her. And, you know, the dynamic design, because as you would hover over the different petals, they'd get bigger, they'd show you the title. And if you clicked on them, they'd go out to a different page with that section of information, or that information from that section. And so this timeline tool here that they created was also dynamic as well. As you scrolled through it, whichever place that you were would get bigger. And then you could see a few of the ones on either side of it and a little bit smaller as you went out. And so again, like it would drive you back to the source. Every time you clicked on one of those, it would bring you back to another page, which had more information about it, instead of presenting it on the page itself, which was interesting, because they figured there was a lot of information there. And so to not only divide it up, but to have somewhere else to go to find out more was something that we saw a lot, particularly in this group. And then group 4, they also went in and divided up the information into categories. And so sectioning the information into things like biography, publications, that kind of thing, that only expanded when you clicked on them, that was really important. And then there was a big emphasis on user preferences. And so they wanted to be able to filter sources of information, whether or not they were relevant, or they only wanted to see sources they only wanted to see information from these types of sources. They wanted to be able to pin links and save content settings across pages. So every time that context box popped up, it would know that you were only looking for information from the links store or the links triple store, or only information from Wikidata, or you don't want to see anything from Sparks Notes or things like that. And then they also emphasize being able to access the source of the information. So that large learn more link would again drive you back to where that information was coming from. That was a really big part of this design. Yeah.
Yeah, and then some of the conclusions we came up with after this design frolic were that most groups like to have some sort of visualization in their context box, which was also something we saw today with the emphasis on timelines and maps. And then also they like to categorize their information so that it's more, so it's like easily accessible to the users. So that could come in the form of like tabs across the top, or even today, how people were discussing all these questions that were coming up and trying to put them into categories to address. That would be an interesting way to look at this. And then some of the groups had a way to filter the information based on user preference. So choosing what kinds of sources they wanted to see information coming from, or trying to highlight exactly where that information appears on their context box, things like that. And then most of the groups also had some sort of like user agency aspect in the terms of dynamic design. So if a user hovers over a certain category, it comes up with more information. So incorporating elements like that was also interesting. And yeah.
I think that's all we had to talk about that. But that was essentially kind of the big picture ideas that we got from all of that. And obviously there was quite a bit more time involved because they were able to go in and make all of those very pretty designs. Yeah.
Thanks both. So that takes us almost to time. I knew that giving us 10 minutes at the end was I was expecting too much out of us, but that's okay. If people have questions they want to put in the chat, we can answer them. We're also, as Sarah's put a page up here on social media, and there will be future design frolics. So if you want to find out about the results to those or anything else that we're doing, please click through to our website and follow along with our newsletter. Huda, yes, I can get in touch with you. Kathleen has started a website where they will go. So yes, we will be, once it's polished up, we'll be tweeting them out.
All right, and yeah, we have time for 1 minute of questions, but maybe this would be a good plug for the Slack channel to continue the discussion there, if that works for everybody. I'd really like to thank our presenters, Kim, Susan, Sarah, Erin, Kathleen, Aaliyah, and Rashmeet. This is super amazing, super fascinating. Thank you so much for all the effort you put into this. It was really great.
Thanks. It was really fun. And, and I'm really happy that it worked out the way it did. Thank you everyone for participating.
Yes, thank you everyone, and have a good rest of the conference. Bye.
Yay.
Yeah, great job.
Yeah, really great job. I loved the breakout room conversations.
Yes, I was really at the beginning when there was like one person in them and I was like, how's this gonna go? But people seemed happy to hop about. And
it's just a function of the fact that you chose so many engaging topics. Everybody was having a hard time choosing.
Right. Kathleen, we're gonna have to put Mama back into a future frolic because I love that thing. So
yeah, I was surprised that so few people were. There were 2 eventually. But
yeah, I think if we had put images of them, right away. People would have been like, cool, creepy spider, let me in.
People didn't know what it was, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, like there's a
Alright.
whole ton of those. There's a whole ton of Louis Bourgeois stuff around the Rijksmuseum.
Mhm. That's where,
All over the place. Yeah.
yeah, that's where I know it from. It's super cool.
Isn't there one
Um,
in front of, isn't the spider in front of the National Gallery of Canada also a Louis Bourgeois? Yeah.
That's why I
might
know
be the
it.
actual one. Yeah.
That's the first one I knew. And then I went to the Rijksmuseum. It was like, whoa, they're everywhere. There are quite a few there.
In terms of sharing something with all the participants, if I make a document, can we do that through you, or is it best to just do it on social media and say if you were there? What's the?
It's a good question. I
You can
think,
email all participants through Sketch, right?
yeah, you could. I think you could do that. You would get a lot of people who didn't make it as well, but that's okay. Yeah, I would try maybe Sched, and then social media also works good, but also maybe the Slack channel.
I haven't joined the Slack channel yet, so maybe we should do that in case people respond to that. Okay. Yeah, that's a good idea. I can put it in several places. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Cool. All right. Yeah, thanks again. That was great. And,
Yeah, thanks for letting us do a crazy thing. It was fun.
no problem. Yeah. All right. Yeah. And then, yeah, this is going to be, I think automatically it's got uploaded to YouTube. So nothing to do there. And should be there probably by tomorrow, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, just a reminder, I guess, to save the chat if for some reason that's useful for
Yeah,
everybody.
I want that. We've been doing that, but I'm not sure where we're supposed to put them. I think it's just if you wanted it for your own edification later, then.
Sarah, can you do that quickly? Because you have all our other chats.
Yes, I did just save the chat. I also opened the stream to see if I could grab the link from it and had the completely uncanny experience of having us speaking live and us speaking with a short delay. And so it was some sort of, it was like we were singing in a round. It was not good. I just now need to see what the chat saves to.
It's hilarious.
All right. Cool.
Wonderful.
Well,
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, guys. I'm going to jump out. Bye.
see you later.
Bye.
Thanks, Anne. Bye.